Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've seen a few Laurel and Hardy films today.
That's right.
So there's a Birmingham Laurel and Hardy Society that apparently every year, this is the first we've gone to, shows a few Laurel and Hardy movies at the Mac. So they showed a couple of shorts today, which were Twice 2 and County Hospital from 1933 and 32 respectively. And then they showed a feature, 1937's Way Out West. I had not really seen Laurel and Hardy before. I'm obviously familiar with the people, and I'd seen bits and pieces, and I was familiar with, Oliver Hardy looks to camera, Stan Laurel sort of scratches his head in that way, that sort of thing. So very familiar with the sort of personas, but I'd never seen even one of their shorts really all the way through. Your familiarity with Laurel and Hardy?
I grew up with them. We used to go to this church that showed them in the basement. The parents would go off and do things. It was a social thing, that was run from the church, and the parents would go off and do something, and they would show us silent Laurel and Hardy films. So I just kind of grew up with them. I get them all muddled in my head. I couldn't tell you which one was which, but I love them.
When you say they showed you silent ones, did they include sound ones with just the sound off, so they wouldn't disturb?
To be honest, I don't know. Right? I mean, I actually don't know, because this is when you were like 7, 8 or something. So what they showed, all I remember is that there was no dialogue, which is why they were showing them to us, because they were probably very cheap. I don't know, they might even have been in Super 8 or something. But we went to a Spanish church social club. So and this was in Montreal. So I think the being silent or the turning the sound off, would have been a convenience, but I couldn't tell you whether they were silent ones or whether they had turned the sound off.
Well, one thing I can tell you from these three that we saw today is I can imagine them playing extremely well with the sound off, because a lot of the jokes are enormously visual. There's actually not so much which is based on dialogue.
But there's a lot that is based on sound, and that's an important distinction.
True.
So, yeah.
But still, very slapstick, a lot of it. And actually, I was surprised at how much of it was throwaway, because my familiarity with comedy of that era, or maybe just prior, is things like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. I'm much more familiar with them. And something that I'm very used to with them, even in the shorts rather than the features, is the length of time a joke sustains. So Chaplin, Keaton will set up a situation, and they'll get as much as they can out of a prop or something. Whereas here, things are really just throwaway gags. For instance, in the first one, Twice 2, when Laurel rips Hardy's trousers and then he ties them up to his sort of jacket in a funny way, you kind of think that might come back later, the fact that his trousers are not staying up properly. But they don't. It is just there for that minute, for that second.
I mean, that might be a difference also between they're all short, but, the 20-minute shorts as opposed to the 1 hour long, more feature type film, because there are a lot of recurring gags. There
is bigger structure to what's going on in there. But I mean, thinking back to the Chaplin that we watched at the cathedral, those were sort of 20-minute shorts, and those had more structure to the they eked more out of their situations.
Well, maybe they just didn't have enough good material like these guys do.
Well, maybe, but that was I suppose a kind of a disappointment. Like the jokes felt less. They felt more throwaway, and.
But I loved it. I mean, and actually, I'm not sure about that, because they would do one thing and then they would build and then they would build and then they would repeat part of it, or then they would surprise you. And what seemed miraculous to me today was we were shown very bad versions. They were shown in the wrong ratio. The projection system was really crappy. We would have done better by watching them. I mean, I have a full box set of all their works, I think, of the collected works. We would have, done better in many ways by just watching it at home. Except we wouldn't have had this experience of watching it with this audience, and there was something really magical about seeing like 4-year-old kids laughing at the same time as 90-year-olds. And kind of, so all of these things work.
Oh yeah, they still work.
So,
but I do think they don't. I feel like there are longeurs in kind of the midst of these films between jokes where you kind of go. Sometimes the energy level actually feels quite low in them.
I didn't. I must say, I didn't find that. I loved the pacing of them. I loved in Way Out West, was it?
Way Out West is the feature. Yeah,
the musical elements. You know, I love the moments where they just dance. I mean, actually, there was a moment where they danced, and the audience applauded in one of the shorts. And then, kind of, what I also loved is seeing where some of your favorite gags of later films, some of my favorite gags, originate. So, you know, one of the you know, when I was growing up, Foul Play came out, and there's a whole extended sequence where they get the wrong guy, this dwarf, and the dwarf ends up in the hospital like this in a cast and so on, you know, and they go bring him flowers, and, you know, instead of kind of making his life better, they kind of wreck him, and he ends up falling out the window and so on. And you could say, oh my God, you know, this bit that I loved so much in this like 1970s film, this is where it comes from.
Yeah, County Hospital.
County Hospital.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And actually made me go, ooh, at one point, which was not a reaction I was expecting to give to any film, where the doctor's out the window and the rope snaps, and he just catches, just holds on by his fingers, like, whoa, and I went, ooh.
That was such a great gag.
Which I mean, fantastic. Well, that wasn't even a gag at that point. It was like legitimately scary. But the whole section was a great gag.
And they have great rhythm, which actually, you know, I'm not too sure how to describe it without pointing to it. You know, but those scenes where they're going up and down in County Hospital, right? Which involves repetitions and so on. And a lot of the joke, or whether it's funny or not, just comes out of the way they rhyme it, yeah? Or the you know, the pacing of the going up and the going down, and the getting up close to the window but not quite reaching, and, you know, and also actually visual things like the fact that, you know, they're both fat.
Well, the Doctor and Hardy.
Yeah, you know, yeah, and the type of fatness that it is, you know, like the shapes that the bodies make. I mean, I think it's wonderful. And
well, Laurel and Hardy are a classic, you know, kind of thin guy, fat guy pairing, and they kind of, I suppose they never really point to it or make jokes about that, but just I don't know how to describe it. They just make sense as a pairing.
They look right, and actually, there's something. I mean, you know, the looks at the camera. You know, the way that they move together, you know, that dance that they did was just so lovely. I mean, actually, the whole audience burst into applause, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I think what you were getting at earlier, or, you know, one of the reasons why maybe these films, which continue to live, I mean, my God, this fan club, you know, they're putting out programs every month that are attended by 130, 150 people, they said, right? So there's an audience for them in crappy conditions. You know, so, but maybe the reason why...
Well, to be fair, I don't think they show them every month at the Mac.
No, not at the Mac.
In the what was it, the Hexagon, which is not a cinema, it's a theatre, and it's not the place to see a film. But.
No. You know, so don't get me wrong, we're very grateful that they showed them, and, you know, there's this thing going on in Birmingham. But anyway, there is an audience for them. They're still famous, but, you know, they're not on the level of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin. And partly, I think, it's basically because, you know, the films are cheaper. I mean, I think they themselves are absolutely fantastic, you know, but you could see that the films are kind of cheaply made, right?
And I think the level of craft is not as high in almost every sense. In terms of kind of the production quality, and obviously money has a huge effect on that, but also in terms of the timing of the editing and things like that. It relies much more on their performance than it does on you know, the way the films are made, sort of incorporating them.
Well, I think their performance is so indistinguishable from the sight gags, you know, because actually it's got fantastic sight gags, you know, and bits that look like animation, and, you know, tricks. Yeah, like the bit where Oliver's head is stuck in
the ground.
And then he, you know, I mean, that's a bit of animation,
Yes, yeah.
the neck,
Well, it struck me that there's I don't know if I used the word cartoony earlier already, but if I haven't, I'm going to use it now. Something very cartoony about them in the sense that there is a playing with the physical world and a bending of the rules that is not something I really recognise in those other comedians that I mentioned. It's not something I recognise in Chaplin, Keaton, or anyone else, because so you have things like Oliver Hardy's his neck being stretched as Stan stretches him out the ground. You have Stan's toe sticking through the bottom of his shoe, and Oliver Hardy pulls it, and it stretches. It turns to a rubber prop at that point. You've got the thing about flicking the finger and it turning into flame, which is something the film actually it highlights to the audience, because then you have Oliver trying to do it himself and he can't. At the end of County Hospital, I think it was one of the first two. They're driving. Yeah, it's County Hospital because they're driving.
Yes.
And then the car is bent by 90 degrees and they're driving in circles. Like, that is something that you would see in Looney Tunes or Hanna-Barbera.
Yes.
All these things are from that. Or not from that. I mean,
well, actually,
preceded.
They
may have well have inspired
Looney Tunes, yes,
absolutely.
Probably got it from here.
Absolutely. But the point is, like, they absolutely inspire. And actually, I think the looks to camera and things like that as well. I mean, to the point where some of those looks to camera became kind of irritating for him, because they really don't they don't let it lie. They do it so much. It's not the odd time. All the time Ollie's doing it, and he's constantly trying to have this conversation with the audience, like,
but it's
look at the mess I'm in.
Timed, though.
Not always.
Well,
I think they actually they don't let it lie sometimes.
No, I loved it. You felt there was a real sense of communication with the audience, and that it was building, and that it wasn't just when they couldn't think of anything better to do. It was kind of like part of the act. I liked it very much.
I think they did too much. Maybe it's a taste thing. I do something, But what I really like, here's something I absolutely love, is my favourite thing about Stan is how he will decide to live with his own confusion at the world. So at the start of County Hospital, he's going to see Ollie, who's in hospital. He's in traction, and he says, "Oh, I'm looking for Oliver Hardy." And the receptionist says he's in room 14 next to the solarium. And he wants to ask what that means, or what, and you can see him processing it, going, do I, and then deciding just to not ask, and then he's wandering down the hall, he goes to the wrong room, and someone else says the same thing, and again, he's like trying to ask, and he decides, I'll just live with this. And every time he decides, I'll just live with
some disaster happens.
There's no disaster. It just makes me laugh.
No.
Just makes me laugh every time he goes, I'm just not going to bother asking questions. And it's something really. It's not subtle because it's who he is, but it's kind of, it's all in his performance and his timing, and the way that it's all in his face.
Yes.
Kind of his movement. You can tell exactly what he's thinking as his face changes from I will ask, I won't ask, I will ask, I won't ask. This is confusing. I'll live with it. I love that about him.
There were so many. I mean, I laughed throughout, and there were so many different types of gags, right? So actually, you think this should be like contemporary comedy directors should watch these films more, really, because. So for example, when they did the cross-dressing bit, right, they got laughs from so many different things, right, from the tone of voice, from the contrast between the tone of voice, right, from the different things that everyone was wearing, right, from the gags that they'd set up, from the way that kind of, they were singing, right, like, I mean, just kind of so many different variations of those things, really. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. I wasn't that mad about the cross-dressing one, to be honest.
I loved it. And it wasn't because it was cross-dressing. It was just because of that brilliance of, kind of a play on your expectations. So one is a flapper and speaks with a very high voice, kind of. I mean, I love just the outfit of that Oliver Hardy was wearing, that white satin thing with a tiara.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like really, and he was so at ease with it, right?
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
Yeah, that was. I think that was the worst of the three films.
It was still great though.
It was all right. I've seen better.
Well, I thought it was wonderful. So,
The county hospital was great because it got so mad. I mean, this is another thing I would say in the to use that word cartoonish again or cartoony. There's a real anarchy to some of it, you know. So even though in you know those other comedians, things would go crazy and disasters would happen. It's not on the scale of this, I think. Like, or not in the. There's a real sense of. I don't know how to put it. Like, they get into a place and things just start going wrong and don't stop going wrong, and fights start to happen, and it gets very, very mad and then they end up kind of throwing a mule downstairs.
Yes. All of those 1940s cartoons, you can see how much they borrowed. The piano sequence where the keys are hitting their faces. I'm sure I've seen that in Daffy Duck cartoons and Bugs Bunny cartoons, and you know, and this predates it, right? This is what the film is 1937 or something.
This one's
So you know, those cartoons didn't come out until later. So it obviously originates here. You know, kind of the way that things fall, the donkey going up, you know, on the roof. I mean, it is very much like you know, things that you imagine happening in cartoons. But it's not just the cartoony bits, you know, that I find interesting. I mean, I do think, so for example, the musical numbers, right? Just to play on the voices is meant to be funny. You know, the way that some go high and some go low, right? Like, you know...
but that itself incorporates a cartoony element where he goes very, very low, Stan, and Ollie gets a huge mallet, a cartoon-like mallet, and smacks him in the head, and then he goes high. And of course, violence has no influence on anyone in this film. You just smack someone in the head. Everyone gets hit in the head with plates and pans and Christ knows what, and they just, you know, Stan especially, just kind of waves it off.
Yes. It was wonderful to see it with an audience. I think one should always see comedy with someone else, and you know, hopefully more than just one other person. It changes the atmosphere completely. And there was actually something, I don't know, it was like life affirming or something, like, you know, seeing like the kids really get it, and they were all so young, and you know, these films are almost 100 years old, right? So yeah, kind of for 5-year-olds to be reacting in the same way as 90-year-olds about films that are themselves 90-year-olds, I think it's really quite amazing. Very few films would do that.
No, well, that's why they last. I must say, I think my favourite jokes, the ones I laughed the most at least, were verbal ones, though, weirdly. Which I think is not... It's not what they do the most. You know, I think what they do the most is visual and slapstick and that sort of thing. But there was one that really, I think only I laughed at in the room, but I laughed really loud, which was when it's in Way Out West. So the idea of Way Out West is they go... It's set in the Wild West, and they go to this sort of one-horse town, and they have to deliver this deed to a gold mine to this woman, Mary Roberts, and then someone else gets in on it, realises they can steal this, make a few quid, and pretend that they're Mary Roberts, and then they realise, and they go back up to confront this woman, and Stan, you know, being the dumb one, takes a while to work it out, but then he kind of pulls sort of Ollie over and goes, I think we gave the deed to the wrong woman, and you're like, everyone gets it. They go upstairs, and despite being completely in charge of all the information now, and he understands what's wrong, and they need to get this deed back, Stan confronts this woman, and he says, we want to know why you're not Mary Roberts. He's like, you always got it. Oh no, he asked completely the wrong question, got the wrong end of the stick. No one else laughed at that, but I thought that was great.
There are moments that are in these films that are surreal. You know, kind of, you know, several. That it has its own logic, but it's almost like a dream logic. It's a logic, you know, that kind of makes sense in the real world, but doesn't exist in it. Well, you know, kind of the thing with the eating of the egg, right? You know, the thing with the eating of the hat, the way that they go into the piano, and then the guy goes to shut it, and then they fall from the piano, bottom, right? Yeah. Like, you know, so yeah, there's quite a lot of like surreal elements. The laughing, tickling, you know, thing. So yeah, I kind of I
the donkey on the roof. One actually was when Ollie's being winched up, and then he drops him, and he creates a crater when he lands.
Yes.
But they don't really point it out. It's just that at one point Stan walks into it and he's lower.
Yeah.
And that's the first time you notice there's a crater.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting. Like, it was funny. A very obvious cartoony joke.
Yeah.
But then told to you in a subtle way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I kind of
that was lovely.
Yeah. Or the crossing the river and falling in the, you know, and sometimes he floats, and so there are kind of like variations really, but that's repeated 3 times, and it works each time.
Yeah,
Well,
it's coming by the 3rd time.
Yeah, you do know it's coming, and it comes. So anyway, that was excellent.
It was nice to see. They're none too subtle, I would say.
I don't know. I think there are moments of subtlety. So, I mean, I think there are all these jokes. But the thing that struck me was Oliver Hardy's elegance. So he's very fat, but he moves with great elegance, right? And he's very at ease with his body, just, in the way that he moves. And also the way that he uses his fingers. It's just very elegant. And then, and there's a kind of a little cloud of melancholy that surrounds Stan Laurel, and so actually that kind of makes for an interesting tension between them, and also the with Stan Laurel, his face is always transparent. You always know what he's thinking, which is kind of lovely.
Yeah, he is more subtle as opposed to Ollie's interminable looks to camera.
Well,
Yeah.
They're obviously wonderful together.
But I think there is also an element, interestingly, of familiarity that you're supposed to have with them. So they're not playing characters, for instance. They are playing Stan and Ollie.
Yeah, they're playing a character.
Yeah, and they might be, so at the start of Twice 2, you're introduced with a door sign that says Dr. Oliver Hardy, MD, brain surgeon. But it's Oliver Hardy. It's not Dr. John Smith, and then he's Oliver Hardy in the credits.
Yeah.
So they are Ollie and Stan and Ollie, and I suppose you're kind of supposed to have a relationship with them outside of the stories that they're telling.
Yes.
In a way, like at the end of the feature Way Out West. When they discover that the woman is from the South, and Ollie says, "I'm from the South as well," which he was.
Yes.
To be fair,
that was a great.
Stan then
joke.
says, "I'm from the South as well," and he goes, "South of where?" And he goes, "South of London." To be fair, he wasn't from London, but he was English. So I think there's a kind of thing there where the joke is funny, but also you bring your understanding of the real people to the film. Which so it's not like they're playing The Tramp, where it's a genuine different sort of creation. They are playing themselves, and that they're themselves, and they use their real names. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. By the time that the audience sees them in these films from the early 1930s, they've been familiar. The audience would have been familiar with them already for 10 years or something. And this is what I'm trying to find out when their first film together was. 1921. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first film pairing of the two was The Lucky Dog in 1921. So
that's when they worked together as cast members. It says, but it talks about them officially becoming a team in 1927.
Ah.
Yeah, they were not a comedy team at that time, and it was not until 26 that they appeared in a short movie together.
Ah, right.
And then in Putting Pants on Philip, which was a silent short in 27, that's when they became a proper pair.
Okay. But be that as it may, by 1932, the audience would have been, kind of very familiar with them. And then, I also love Babes in Toyland. And then they lasted until the 50s, really, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
who's actually more comparable to him, that's just occurred to me, is the Marx Brothers, who are also more...
No, they're not comparable.
Well, I was in a certain way, in that they tended to have fewer gags that were stretched out. They did. I mean, they had the mirror scene in Duck Soup, was it, for instance? But much more of their stuff was very, very quick fire, in the way that these are.
Well, but their stuff was almost all verbal,
yeah,
really.
It was. Yeah.
I think it's. I see.
No, I mean they're not comparable in certain senses, but in the sense of the length of gags that I don't think
Anyway, it's amazing. Well, the Marx Brothers still live, and Buster Keaton still lives. And by that I don't mean just some few film buffs somewhere are still appreciating their films. I mean, they actually have a currency in the culture still. I was very surprised when I went to Buenos Aires in the summer, and you're seeing film stuff, and it's still Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin, and so on, right? Kind of, they are worldwide figures. They're recognized everywhere. I mean, the same actually when, a few years ago when we went to Istanbul and, kind of you're looking through the market, and instead of seeing like Brad Pitt or something, you're still seeing like Charlie Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy, and, it's kind of something that lasts. It's like a recurring stock.
Well, I mean, you can't draw a silhouette version of Brad Pitt that people recognise.
Yes.
But Charlie Chaplin, you just need the hat and the moustache, maybe the cane.
Yeah.
The feet sort of
That's true.
one side. That's
and
probably
Stan Laurel as well, and Fred Astaire as well.
Yeah.
So there are a few, types who are rendered iconographically very easily.
I think Laurel used to apprentice or understudy for Charlie Chaplin a little bit.
I forget the legend, but it's something like he came on the same boat, or, they certainly kind of knew each other from working in the music halls in London. If this wasn't eavesdropping or we're not meant to research anything, we could have looked it up, really.
Well, I'm looking it up.
Ah, okay.
He was a member... Okay, this is just off Wikipedia. Laurel began his career in music hall, where he developed a number of standard comic devices. His performances polished his skills at pantomime and music hall sketches. He was a member of Fred Carno's army.
That's right.
Where he was Charlie Chaplin's understudy. He and Chaplin arrived in the United States on the same ship from the United Kingdom with the Carno troupe.
There you go.
There you go.
So my memory wasn't so bad.
No, we've both done very well remembering stuff today.
All right, so let's wrap it up, and thank you very much for listening. We're Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and our website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Excellent.
Cheerio.